Standards-based grading and reporting, here we go. This work is based on the work of Bob Marzano, Tom Gutsky. Lots of professionals have really explored standards-based grading and reporting. These links, if you go to lsalearning.com, there's a website which has this PowerPoint. These links are live. These links take you to the current research that's going on into standards-based grading and reporting and what we're learning about it, why it works, when it works, and how to make it work. But the first thing that we really need to think about is, what's the difference between standards-based grading and reporting and standards-aligned grading and reporting? Standards-based means that students are being compared and grading is being aligned to a specific set of standards. So I might have all my students in my classroom, and I would be reporting out on how each student is doing on the set of standards they are working on. That is standards-based. Standards-aligned means that I am the 5th grade, and the students will get grades on how they are doing on the 5th grade standards. That is called standards-aligned or standards-referenced. If I actually look at a report card, this is Sally, she's in the 2nd grade. One report card says Sally is performing well, sometimes on 1st grade standards, sometimes on 2nd grade standards. But her report card says she's doing really well on the standards she's working on. You want to tell the truth. Parents get a good idea of the truth. Sally is at 1st grade in terms of her reading and writing. She's at the 2nd grade set of standards in terms of mathematics, perhaps. If I were in a standards-aligned system, which is this one here, the teacher has to say, Sally is a lower grade, as in a C or a D or an F, on the grade level standards, instead of saying she's an A or a B or a C on a lower level standard. That's it. That's the difference. Turn to a colleague, make sure they feel comfortable on the difference between standards-based and standards-aligned grading systems. Go. Your current report cards are probably neither one of these. That's okay. The point of this session, to be clear, the point of this session is to make sure we have a common understanding of the terminology. Because it's coming at us. And if someone says, hey, we should do standards-based report cards, we want to make sure that everyone at the table has the same idea of what a standards-based report card is. Or maybe we should do standards-aligned. The fact is, this terminology is getting thrown around all over the place. And what we've learned from the research is, if you do standards-based report cards incorrectly, you can do harm. But if you do standards-based reporting correctly, you can actually do measurable good. So what I'm getting a sense of from your group as a whole is that you want to go slow. You want to learn. What is this thing? Let's talk about it. The more we find out about it and the more we figure out, well, what was the beneficial part of it, the more you can do it in the future correctly rather than jumping into it incorrectly. So what I'd like you to do is kick back and relax and just take in, this is chunked down into little pieces. You notice that first 2 slides was one definition, standards-based versus standards-aligned. If you got it, you're good. The next one, we're going to run through a couple of definitions. But this is not about having you change over to standards-based report card by 5 o'clock. I would not support that. All right, here we go. Grading and reporting. I keep saying standards-based grading and reporting. I keep saying both together. Is that true? But But there's a difference between grading and reporting. Reporting is like a report card. And we use it to tell parents or other school systems what's going on. Grading is something I do to give immediate feedback to students about what's going on. Bloom, how many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Yay, Bloom. So Bloom used to ask his graduate students a question. He would say, as educators, what is your purpose? Is your purpose to find talent and anoint it with a meaningful A? To sort children, A's and B's, who are children who should become our managers and our CEOs? From our C, D, and F, where the industrial model was telling us would enter up into the labor force. Because if our purpose is to find talent in a meaningful way, then I need to set up tasks, and the students who can do the tasks get the A. And the students who cannot or do it a little less, they get the B. Students who take longer to figure out how to do the tasks, even though they can do the task at the end, I need to make sure they don't accidentally get the A because they learn slower. So I average grades, and that makes it a B. And anyone who's not following the rules or in compliance, I should give a 0 to, because in the 100-point scale, that sabotages them immediately. But I need to, because I need the A to mean something. If my purpose is to find talent. And in the industrialized model, that is exactly what we were supposed to be doing. And that's where we absolutely created the 100-point scale, A through F, and the behavior of averaging grades. Then Bloom goes on and he says, or is the purpose to develop talent? If the purpose is to develop talent, different rules apply. If I am here to find out where the student is currently and help them go forward, then I need a methodology where I get diagnostic information about where they are so I can give a prescription for improvement. And A, B, C, D, F doesn't matter because I'm not comparing children to children. I'm comparing children to a set of standards. All children could get an A then. Whereas in the finding talent, I need to grade on a curve. Someone's got to get an A. But if every child gets an A in my class, there's something wrong with my class. That's finding talent. If I'm in the purpose of developing talent, then every child getting an A in my class is good. That means every child is at standard or above. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a crisis of figuring out what's our purpose. Because we work in a system that was designed from the industrialized model. We have policies, habits that are all about finding talent. Yet our entire profession is now committed to developing talent in all students. So if we have to do that, that means we need to adjust those behaviors because we're actually sabotaging ourselves neurologically. Every time we give a summative assessment, every time we give a summative evaluative assessment, research tells us we shut down the brain's ability to make a long-term memory for 1 to 6 days. You want to hear that one again? Every time, whether the child gets an A or an F, doesn't matter. When I give a summative assessment, hormones are released into the brain that suppress long-term memory creation, and that hormone lasts for 1 to 6 days. Yes?
Does this include project-based assessment or just general,
Evaluative. Anything that gets a grade. Let me say it again. This is why this research is so interesting. Now, let me be clear. Almost 30% of your students, evaluative feedback has no impact on them. They're just fine. They thrive on it. They are what are called the naturally academically inclined. They love it. They're like, fine, give me an A, give me an F, we're good. Many people in this room probably fall into that category. Grading either motivated you or you could care less. But, and notice the research said 1 to 6, which means that's an average band. Some students, it's much less, like I just mentioned, and some students, it's more. These hormones that are released are threat-based hormones. They are in either fear of evaluation or they need it badly and they're in the obey state. They just want to comply. They're scared of getting a bad grade. So they're either scared of getting a bad grade or they're scared of the assessment. That threat hormone, in a human way, suppresses long-term memory and increases what we call reactionary state for 1 to 6 days. It is one of the slowest hormones to dissolve. So what does this mean for educators? It means we really need to look at how much we're doing in terms of formative assessments. Formative assessments in America, we've been striving for 70% formative, which is ungraded, and 30% summative, which is graded. But the countries who are top in the world, like Finland, have 0% summative. The first test the children take is in 8th grade, and it is the TIMSS and the PISA assessments, and they're #1 in the world 15 years in a row. Let me say that again. The first summative assessment they take is that standardized test. The rest of their time is a constant feedback loop of here's the target, formative assessments telling you how you're doing on the target, giving descriptive feedback on how to improve. And they do that all year long. No grades. You don't need grades to learn. And you don't need grades to teach. But you do need feedback. You do need descriptive feedback about how you're doing and what you need to improve. But you don't actually need to be evaluated. And we have some problems with this. Problem in America, #1, we don't agree on grading's purpose. Problem in America, #2, we don't agree on what counts. I'm just going to run through this. The other group this morning actually went through this process. I'm not going to make you do the discussion because I really want to get to the grading part. Is that fair? Problem #1, purpose. When we actually survey faculty and we say, what's the point of a report card? These are the top 6 answers that we get. And if I had you prioritize which one of those answers is your favorite, like, yes, that's why we do it, and which one is a no, please don't do it for that. Just quickly read in your mind, try and capture which one is what you think the purpose of a report card is and which one is not. Give me a thumbs up when you're done reading. Pervasively, when we look at this, these are the results that we get. These are pretty typical in terms of which ones are the most important. self-assess that with your own ideas. And in terms of least important, here you go. So what this means is, in terms of providing grades as an incentive, schools have found far better ways to incentivize. And by making tasks more meaningful, we lose the dependence on grades. But to talk about that, I want to talk about a certain kind of student. Did you ever have a student who was grade dependent? Where they say things like, is this going to count? Is this on a test? What can I do to improve my grade? Is there any extra credit? This student, though, when we actually do an MRI on their brain, this student is not in a learning state. This student is in the obey state. They are in a compliance state. They just want to find out anything about what your requirements are so that they can do it and get the A. But they are in an obey state, which is not long-term learning. They're not generating new questions. They're not challenging resources. And so when we think about that, we're actually not trying to get children into that obey compliance state. In the industrialized model, that was fine. But in the information age, we do not want to raise children that just accept and believe everything they read. We do not want children to thrive in the obey state. We don't want them to learn how to do school. We want them to learn how to think. So removing grades as an incentive allows you to put other things on the table as incentive. So having students design silos, having them actually work through what elevators are and challenge new designs, and then putting them out there on a proficiency scale will give them feedback and will be an incentive, giving them an authentic audience. These are the kinds of tools we're using now instead of grades, when we can. Problem number 2, we don't agree on what counts. When we survey faculty and ask them, what should we count on a grade? This is the list we get. So here's my challenge to you. How many of these items should count on a report card grade? 0 to 3, 4 to 10, or 11 or more? In your mind, or actually with a colleague, real quickly, just briefly, how many of these things should count on a report card? 0 to 3, 4 to 10, or 11 or above? Take a read. What should count? So looking at these pieces and looking at the pervasive results we get, it looks like this, which means we completely don't agree. We have just as many people going for 6 and under as 12 and more. And the only thing we agree is that we don't want 4. Sounded like a Dr. Seuss book. All right. So in that sense, we got a lot of work to do if we're going to try and decide how many of those items are going to get averaged into a report card grade. And what we find when we go into school systems is that even within the school, different teachers are doing it in completely different ways. So parents have to figure it out, which make them attack the system. And students can't figure it out, which doesn't promote learning. This puts children into the obey state. They're just going to figure out what you want and do what you want to get the A. But now what we're in is a find talent technique. The child who can figure out your expectations first wins.
Isn't that real life, though? Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about real life.
I mean, my boss tells me, you do this. I say, I bow and I say, yes, sir.
There's that. There is. There are elements of compliance. But what we're talking about here is clear purpose. So if my purpose is to find talent, then do not pretend to be a school that will develop talent in all. That was a little too rough for late in the day. I am sorry. What I meant was, what we need to do then is be crystal clear. We never said that this grading technique was for preparing children for the real world. What it is a telling the truth to parents about how students are doing toward a specific expectation. I need to be clear about what the expectation is, and then I need to report out exactly how the student is doing toward meeting that expectation. It is not about training children how to survive in the fluid motions of real world. If that was the case, then I need to change what my report card says its purpose is. Standards-based report cards are reporting how children are doing against standards. To do that well, though, and to your point, it means it has to have 3 criteria. 1 grade is all about how the student is doing toward that product, toward the standards. That's what that grade is, and it's only on that grade. So who here teaches social studies? Excellent. Hello, welcome for being here. Thank you. So social studies, my product grade is only on how the child is doing on social studies content and social studies skills. That's all that goes into that grade. Not did they do their homework, not rules following, not dispositions. A process criteria grade is all of that. Personal responsibility, social responsibility, dispositions, perseverance, endurance, rules following. Can they turn their work in on time? That's process grade. I don't want to mix them up. Why don't I want them to mix up? Here's one. Because when I have a student who doesn't do well in my class because they didn't do any of their homework, but they were able to meet all the standards, but I give them a lower grade, what, 10%? If I do that, then I just said that personal responsibility is only worth 10%. It deserves its own grade. Does that make sense? When you minimize it down to 10%, then a parent comes in and goes, but my kid can do all your standards in a heartbeat. They can pass that test. You go, yeah, but they didn't do an ounce of homework. And they go, well, your homework policy stinks. And now you're defending your homework policy. It deserves more. So I don't mean to diminish it. I actually want to step it up. The last one is a progress grade. Progress grade means how far has the child grown since they've been in the class. So if I've ever had a child come into my grade, but they were several grade levels below, and they worked their tail off, and they closed 3 grade levels, but they're still not at grade. Product criteria is still a F. They're not at grade level. Process criteria, though, they worked their tail off, A. And progress, they closed 3 grade levels of material, A. That is a more transparent and honest view of that child than a C in product. Does that make sense? That's what you're going for. The point of standards-based grading is to tell the truth as clearly as possible. This is an example of what the grading process can look like in an interim report, for example. The student has a goal. They retake the test or the assessment or the task. You track every grade showing growth over time. This is a progress and growth reporting feature. Here's one. This is a high school report card. So what this one has is it has achievement. That's the product. Then they have 4 grades to show process. This school is in Canada, and this one has participation, homework, punctuality, and effort. Punctuality does not mean they come to school on time. It means they turn their things in on time. This tool is how it was used at the high school level. Now here's what they did. High schools have to do things like salutatorians and valedictorians and top 10% of the class, although that's not something that makes much sense anymore.
And grants.
Oh, there we go, and grants, here we go. So what they do here is to qualify to be in the pool of candidates for valedictorian. You can have nothing under a 3 in participation, homework, punctuality, and effort. After that, then they use the actual product grade to calculate valedictorians and scholarships and pick any feature like that. So the United States is the last industrialized nation to insist on having 1 grade at a course level. The rest of the world has stopped that. So I don't know what to tell you in terms of percentages. Now, in the United States, 2 states have gone to court over it to defend grading, Rhode Island and Kentucky. And when you go to court for grading, our current methodologies lose. So they have been forced as states to go to standards-based grading systems. So in terms of getting into college, yeah, all of our colleges accept these kinds of report cards. We're good? Here's another one. Okay, the darker color tint shows the child's score in the beginning of the year. The lighter tint shows how the child is scoring now. So this is a way, using a proficiency scale, which is up at the top there, this report card is showing product and progress, and process would be one of the actual line items: homework, punctuality, effort. These are samples of standards-based reporting, because it's a report card. Habits of mind, if you've got any extra time, you might want to look up HOM, Habits of Mind, by Ben Alcock and Art Costa. Art Costa and Ben Alcock have created and talked about 16 habits of mind. And these 16 habits of mind can be overtly taught and assessed, and they give us the full way to do it. And the habits of mind are things like perseverance, or managing impulsivity, or listening with understanding and empathy. There are also things like responding with wonderment and awe, or humor. So these are the things that we find in dispositions, and these are the things that we can put into things like effort or participation if you wanted to. So we can make these incredibly concrete. But here's what I'd really like to talk about now. Ladies and gentlemen, standards-based grading is pursuit of truth. Which brings us to this slide. I need a table I haven't picked on. Grades now. Reporting is a report card. Now I need to talk about how do I grade, because it gets impacted. So let's play this game called Are Your Grades Accurate, Consistent, Meaningful, and Supportive of Learning? Our first contestants are right here, folks. Here we go. That's how you can tell it's so late I can't even speak. All right, so let's pretend I teach a science class. And these are my students. You all very good at science? No. No? Do you teach science?
Yep.
I knew it. Here we go. And in my course, this student gets a B, and this student gets a B, and this student gets a B. And this student gets a, wait for it, B. So now, is my grading of these B's accurate, consistent, and meaningful? Let's check it out. Well, my first student over here, wave to the crowd. My first student over here came into the class and was actually able to do about 80 to 85% of the science standards. He's a good student. He shows up, he does his homework. We had a couple of issues here and there every once in a while, but not a big deal. He gets the B. This student came in, and this student was able to do the science standards the day he walked in. He had them down pat. But he didn't do an ounce of homework. And quite frankly, he was disruptive. And so I got to teach this kid a lesson. But it's only 10% of the grade that I've got room. So even though he could do 100% of the standards, I gave him a B. This student, she came in, and she really had a hard start. She really struggled. So a couple of those first tests were low. You know what I mean? But she worked really hard. She was amazing. She came to every extra credit. She was so determined that by the end of the marking period, she could do 100% of the standards, just like he could. But because I have to average grades, she got a B. And this student, she came in, she was good, but she really could only do about 70% of the standards, maybe 75. But she worked so hard. She came to every extra credit. She came to every extra help. And she's a fantastic ambassador in the classroom. I mean, she's out there helping other people. She's really making connections for me in my classroom. She's amazing. So I gave her the B. All 4 of these students got the exact same grade. But when they get to college, it means completely different things to the colleges. And they feel betrayed, by the way, when we keep misleading them this way. And this student never got the actual feedback he needed to improve his performance. He resents me, and he resents my process, and his parents will attack me because they can prove to me that his performance on the actual standards is all that really mattered, and now I'm defending my homework policies, right? And these students also didn't get the feedback that they needed. In fact, the only one it was probably accurate for was sitting right there. And this student, who was able to do all of the standards at the end, got a B. If I was really just reporting transparent and meaningful, as soon as a student can meet all the standards, they get the A. Last and final performance stands. Best performance stands. So now if we look at the story of our 4 students, and we start saying, well, then what's the point of grading? How are we doing it? We get 2 major results from the research. The first is grades are not required for learning or teaching. And when grading is done, it should never be done on a curve. Now, when we talk about the curve, how am I grading these kids? I'll tell you a true story. I remember being with a group of teachers. You willing to be my teachers? Buck in there, it's okay. It's almost over. And that was a joke. Wow, we are just not having it this afternoon. I love you all. I'm going to tell you a story now. When we have essays, I was with a group, we had tons of really hard essays, and we all taught the same kids. And so to grade it, we went, all right, here we go. We got the essays. Let's pull out Rebecca, Alexa, and Lena, and let's grade their essays first, because they're the A's. And if we missed something, that's actually a critique of my unit. Probably I didn't cover it correctly if they missed it. Then I pull out Patrick and Isabel, because they're always my strugglers. And I found the D, because I'm not doing F's, right? So just a D. And then I start grading the other papers. And I start finding, hey, if they were up at Rebecca and Alexa and Elena category, I'll give them the A. Nice job. And if they're a little less, I found my B's and my C's. When I grade like that, that's called grading on a curve. It's equally unfair to automatically have my D's, or even if they did a really good job and then by the end of the grading, I take another look at Patrick and Isabel and see if I can make them a C or a B. That's grading on a curve. It is equally unfair to say that Alexa and Rebecca and Lena set the criteria. I should have clear criteria. And that is how I find that piece. So looking at this, checking is essential. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull through this piece. One thing I want to do before the end of the day is this piece here, which is about rubrics and proficiency scales. To make standards-based grading work, if you're actually going to shed the 100-point scale, and you're actually going to shed averaging grades, which are the instructional implications, you need to have something that replaces it that works. There's got to be another way. A proficiency scale is an alternative to the 100-point scale. So this is a proficiency scale. I'd like you to take 1 minute and just read the proficiency scale. Each of the headings has been well vetted, and then I'm going to show us how to use it. What I'd like to do is model how a proficiency scale works, because it is different from a rubric. In a rubric, I take student work and I look at the student work and I evaluate it according to the rubric. That's 4-level work, that's 3-level work, that's 2-level work, that's 1. By the way, the original rubrics only had 2 columns. At standard or approaching. And then they had a blank part that said annotated from student work. It was descriptive, not evaluative, which is why rubrics were so effective. When we ruined them, did I say that out loud? What I meant was, when we changed them into evaluative rubrics and we made 4 columns and put numbers on them and used them to grade, they lost their effectiveness. A rubric is used to evaluate student work. A proficiency scale does not do that. A proficiency scale is used to evaluate an assessment. So, who's going to have the pretend test? You have the pretend test. How many questions are on this test? There are 20 questions on this test. My handwriting gets worse as there are more questions. There we go. When I'm designing my test, I have to come up with what items off of the rubric will be level 2 items, not rubric. What items off of the test will be 2.0 items, what will be 3.0 items, and what will be 4.0 items. So how many of your items will be at standard, the exact language of the standard? Some of them might be easier versions. Some might want more. Do you ever have easy questions on the test, kind of like to kind of get them into it? A couple of basic questions? Maybe part of the standard or a prerequisite just to make sure they've got the basics. Do you do that? Of course. How many questions should we have that are like that? 5, 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, 2.0. I might label it right on the test. How many items will be at standard? where the student actually has to do all of the standard as written? How many? There we go. And how many questions on my assessment will expect more inferencing, will expect the students to do more analyzing, to take the standard deeper, go above and beyond the standard?
You want to adjust it 12 and then 3 for the hard ones.
Okay, I gotcha. Like that? Oh, that could have been all kinds of amusing on a whole new level. I dodged it. Let's see if she can do it for the next 3 minutes. Okay, so now I have used my proficiency scale. Now my students take the assessment. One of my students let's find out how they did. If the child gets all of the 2.0 items, let's say they get correct, correct, correct. They aced it. Correct, partially correct, a high partial. They got most of it correct. Correct, correct, incorrect, correct, correct. Everyone following what I'm doing? I'm just scoring. The child got this one incorrect, this one correct. This one is a low partial. They got some of it correct, but not a lot. But this one's a high partial. They got most of it correct, but missed a little bit. Correct, correct, incorrect. The 4.0 items, let's say they got low partial, and a correct. Could a child perform like that on a test? Sure could. Now, using the proficiency scale, if the child got all the 2.0s correct, they've got a score of a 2.0. Doesn't matter how many questions, not 10 points off, 5 points off, it's just, did they get them right? There could have been 2 questions, there could have been 100. For them to get a score of a 3.0, which means at standard, they need to get no major errors in the 2.0s. So let's look. Now that's a high partial, so that's not a major error. I'm going to give it to them. Did they get all the 3.0s correct? Let's look. Okay, well, we got 1. They got most of the 3.0s correct. And no major errors at the 2.0. So far, I'm either at a 2.5 or a 3.0. Looking at the 4.0 material, they got 1 of them, but then they had 2 that were kind of just low. They're not really performing at the 4.0 level. I can't give them a 4.0. What does it say for 3.5? What's the wording say? Someone read it. Partial success. Can we call this partial success? But were there any major errors at 3.0? There were some. So this student would stay at a 3.0. I don't average them, I don't add them up and then divide them by the number of problems. I don't do any of the habits I used to do with the 100-point scale. I am really just looking at how are they performing toward standard. 1.0 means with help can perform. Did you ever have a child walk into your class to take a test and they go like this? And you go, are you ready to take this test? No. Would you like some help? Yes. If you say, look, I'll give you a score of a 1.0, you can use your notes, you can use these hint cards. So now the child is actually performing. Can they actually do it? A score of 0.0 means I gave them the hint cards and the help, and they still couldn't perform, which tells you this child probably has a social emotional situation, has something where they desperately need an intervention and our help, and we should pay attention to that. Because I tried to give them help, and they couldn't perform. Starting here and then moving back.
Isn't there a margin of error, though, if you're trying to negotiate whether the
Sure, but they have to have no gross major errors at 2.0 to get a 3.0.
But when you were just grading it, you were saying they could be at a 2.5 or a 3.0.
Because some schools will say that high partial still keeps them out of the 3.0 category. That's something where we would have to have our policies. But this is how we use a proficiency scale, and that's how we score an assessment using a proficiency scale. And it had nothing to do with a rubric. I align it to the assessment, to the task. Someone else had a question. Yes?
So if they had gotten the 3.0s correct, but then had done like they did on the 4.0s, it would have been like 3.5.
Correct. Exactly. Yes?
So basically, the teachers have to make all their own assessments and learn how to write questions at that 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 level.
We need to know whatever our standards are, we need to know them. And
It's easier to just copy it out of the book on the copy machine and give it to them.
it really is. But then when I do that, and I'm asked, what does that A mean? I can't answer it. But when a parent or a school or anyone asks me, I want evidence of how the student is doing toward these standards, I want to talk about that, I can. I will tell you this. Teachers who are doing this method report that they spend a lot less time grading. It's front heavy, which means I need to put more effort into the designing of the assessment. But if you do the whole formative summative thing, you're going to be doing fewer summative assessments anyway. And then if they're well designed like this, grading them is a cake. I don't have to sit there and labor over, well, this one tried really hard, or I can't give him that kind of grade right now. So I share with you that the overall impact is a saving of time. But we need to plan this carefully. Who sees what I mean? This isn't something you just dive into and say, hey, let's do a standards-based report card if we haven't talked about what standards-based grading is. All right, I leave you with that. Here are possible conversions. If you're forced to go to a 100-point scale or A, B, C, D, Fs, my question is this. No, not question, invitation. Because teaching is an invitational art. Force the 100-point scale to obey your proficiency scale. Do not force the proficiency scale to obey a 100-point scale. And you'll be all right. It's only when you go the other way that we actually cause more harm than good. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time, your attention, your hard work, and your continued effort at this hour. I am deeply grateful and impressed. Thank you very much. I'll meet you in the major room when we do our final wrap-up. Thank you, everyone.